What's happening, everybody? My name is Frank Reynolds, and welcome to the first spin-off episode of Is It Worth It? Is It Better? Where I take a look at television shows, books, and movies and compare their counterparts in the other medium, essentially letting you know if it's worth indulging in both. As promised on last week's The Echo Wife book review, I am kicking off this series with a comparison of one of the most popular book and television series in the modern era. We are speaking today on George R.R. Martin's famous A Game of Thrones book series and HBO's immensely popular Game of Thrones. Before we get into this review, comparison, contrasting situation, I wanted to let you guys know how I got into both of these series, because you might have gotten into both of these or one of these a little bit differently. After the first season of Game of Thrones aired on HBO, I started hearing about this new television series and that it was intriguing, it was interesting, and that it was really well done, very different from a lot of other television shows. This certainly intrigued me, so I binge watched the first season of Game of Thrones. Couldn't have loved it more. When the second season came out, I didn't even have an HBO subscription. Ended up getting one simply for that show, and then finished out the season live, and from season 3 on, watched it week to week. Between seasons 4 and 5, I finally decided that I couldn't wait any longer, and I wanted to get into the book series, so I ended up binge reading books 1 through 5 during that span. Obviously, Game of Thrones ended in 2019, and we have yet to receive the latest novel in the series, Winds of Winter. The last publication in the Game of Thrones series was the 5th novel in the projected 7-book series, A Dance with Dragons, in 2011. So it's been a full decade since George R.R. Martin has graced us with a new novel. I'm personally a bit more forgiving in that aspect. Currently writing an epic fantasy myself, I understand how long it can take. I've been working on my own novel for 5+ years. Getting the little details right is not easy, and when you have this much pressure on you, especially after some of the backlash from the show, which we will get to in this comparison, you gotta make it worth the reader's while. So hopefully we get something in the near future, and we are not waiting another decade plus for the final, not even the final, the second to last book in the series. I don't even know if we're ever going to get the last one. All the fan theories might just be theories forevermore. Hopefully not, but we'll see. When HBO decided to make Game of Thrones into a television series, it was a huge undertaking, because not only would it require an incredible amount of special effects, something that hadn't really been heard of in the television world to that point, but the sheer storytelling is so in-depth in the novels, given the multiple character perspectives. Setting and world building was going to have to be essential. Wow, did the network crush, especially the first couple seasons of the show. Starting with the characters, a lot of the show's strengths come from the casting decisions that crew made. Specifically regarding the younger protagonist, this can be really, really difficult to do and trust that they are going to develop into good actors. And man, they didn't get a single character wrong. The show also made a decision, a conscious decision, to allow these characters to start the series a little older than they do in the books. Also a great decision. Really, the show, character-wise, does everything you could have wanted it to do as a book lover. And still, with the way George R.R. Martin writes, it's tough to say that it did better than the book series. I mean, if you think you love, for instance, the character Tyrion in the show, just wait until you read George R.R. Martin's character perspective for him. Now, something that the show does a little bit better than the books is integrate George R.R. Martin's world for viewer eyes. It's not that George R.R. Martin does a bad job with this. In fact, his world building skills are second to none in the fantasy genre. I'd even say in the fiction realm in general. But the way that HBO's series was able to present his vision for an audience it felt like a real world in that first season, and it only gets better as the seasons progress. Stunning. The reason I say it's better is because when I think about Westeros and Essos and all of these different places we are introduced to in the Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones series, I'm going to think of the examples HBO gave us, not the visions I created in my head while reading Martin's story. Maybe this also comes from the fact that I saw some of the seasons before reading the books, but regardless, this is incredibly difficult for cinematographers to do. They do it perfectly. Now, as good as they do there, one area the show fails readers, maybe not viewers, because this isn't necessarily a big deal for people who haven't read the books, but the way it fails readers is in the development of all seven kingdoms. Dorne is the first one that comes to mind. It's the first one that's going to come to mind for anybody who has read the books and see the show. George R. R. Martin's vision and version of that particular realm is significantly better than the show's version in almost every way. It really, not even almost every way, in every single way. Same can be said for the Iron Islands, which the show decides at some point to take a break for over a season from even seeing. The books don't do this. The Vale also serves as simply a plotting device in the television series, when in the book, it's a major player in a lot of ways. I'm trying to do this in a non-spoilerly way, so I hope that those of you who have seen the show and or read the books follow me here and understand what I'm saying. This is the first one we're doing for this, so bear with me a little bit. Basically, a lot of this comes down to the showrunner's decision to cut major plot lines for the sake of focusing on primary conflicts in the show. I get that. It's something that you have to do in television. Some of this also might be because some of these other bigger players in the conflict, like Dorne, don't really show up till later in the series. And at that point, I think HBO might have thought it unnecessary to introduce them as a primary focus rather than a secondary. And to do that, they would have had to cut certain characters that I feel was a mistake. One of my favorite characters in the entire series is not even in the show. That kind of sucks. There's other characters that aren't in the TV series either. One in particular that book readers and show watchers will know immediately. I get the decision to cut that character from the TV show. There's actually a lot of reasons why I understand it, but man, would have been so cool. So the book certainly is better at exploring these areas than the television series. Now, you've probably heard about how the television series is as great in the beginning as it is poor at the end. And yes, the final season of Game of Thrones is not very good. I'm not going to say it's the worst thing ever, because that would be a disservice to the effects team, the score, and the soundtrack. They are the best I've ever seen in a TV series and heard in a TV series. This is a true cinematic experience. The acting, too, is stellar in the last season. There's no surprise why like 15 characters got Golden Globe and Emmy nominations. Story-wise, though, massive disappointment. Now, for all that disappointment, which we will explore in a moment, I have to say that the themes the last season was willing to explore, modern themes, was great. It's very obvious the showrunners at HBO wanted to put a more modern focus on the series than George R. R. Martin does, at least in the earlier stages of his work. The last two books are kind of TBD in that regard, but I like how the show was able to employ some of these modern themes in areas where we could have used that. So, bravo. Maybe a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. The last season it's truly disappointing. So it's tough. I'm trying to find a diamond in the rough here, and it's real rough. I mean, basically, the main issue behind the show and those last the season, maybe 2 seasons, you could argue in general, it's too short. The show is too short for the amount of material they had to work with. As I say that, the books are a bit too long. If you've seen the show, you know what I mean. If you've read the books, I think you know what I mean. Let's start with the series. The decision to end Game of Thrones after 8 seasons was the wrong decision. Even more so when you consider George R.R. Martin wanted the show to run at least 10 seasons, and HBO gave the showrunners the freedom to make the seasons as long and as big as they needed to be. Money was not an issue. It will forever frustrate me when I think about that because of what this could have been. If you have an issue with the story and the way things unfolded at the end of Game of Thrones, that's a creative issue that you need to let go of. And if you didn't agree with some of the decisions that were made regarding a countless number of things I'm not going to get into again for spoiler-related reasons, but if that's your problem, let it go. Now, if you have a problem with the pacing and with the unfulfilled promises and with some of the flat-out pointless foreshadowing, plot development, character arcs that ended up resulting as they did, now you're 100% right. Because that was a main problem with the show that could have been fixed with an extra season or 2 or 4 or however long they wanted to continue the show going. I mean, even making the last 2 seasons just 10 episodes each like the first 6 might have helped significantly. The pacing in that last season, it's way off. The acting is great. The direction is great. The cinematography is great. It's just, the story is the core here, and it's so bad. The execution of the story, I mean, not the actual plot itself, but the execution is so poorly done that it puts a stain on everything. Similarly, though not as starkly, see what I did there, the books, particularly A Dance with Dragons, the final book that's been written, are a bit drawn out. A bit. A tiny bit. The reason I say this is because that novel doesn't really have a climax, at least not for all of its point of view characters, of which there are 16, which is preposterous. It shows, because a lot of these arcs are not finished. We feel like we're getting part of a story. One of the reasons for this is because George R. R. Martin is on the record saying he wants to open up book 6 with a bang. And he's certainly going to, given the direction some of these stories went in book 5. But the end of book 5 ends up being something of a letdown because of that, and we're left wondering why the longest book in the series doesn't feel like a complete book. This is where the show prevails in terms of structure, because when we look at the 5th season of the television show, which is essentially books 4 and 5, it's fast and it's condensed, but the structure works in that it satisfies readers from a conflict resolution standpoint. We also got to quickly talk about the fact that this book series isn't done. I've kind of mentioned it already, but that's maybe the biggest issue with the book series that people have, which is crazy. Like, your biggest problem with a book series is that you haven't read the rest of the book series. That's a testament to how good the book series is, right? But I don't know what's worse, that we haven't gotten the new book in 10 years, or that the series, when it went in its own direction, did such a poor job at wrapping things up. Don't get me wrong, it actually starts pretty well without George R. R. Martin's source material. Season 6 of Game of Thrones, which is mostly new stuff that's not covered in books, is great. A lot of people like season 6. It has its issues, no question about it, but it's entertaining, and it has 2, if not 3 or 4, of the best episodes in the whole series. And then after that, they just start rushing things. They only have 13 more episodes in what could have easily been drawn out to 30 episodes. Again, a mistake. I don't know what the issue was. At the time, the showrunners had a deal to do a new Star Wars movie. That fell through. So, lesson to all of you creative folk out there. Don't look toward your next project while you're still finishing the one that got you the gig. Don't do it. So when we talk about the conclusion of these series, I don't know what's worse right now. Probably the show, because it is done, but at least you can knock it out and move on. So which of these is better? I mean, look, they're both worth it, right? They're both worth your time. If you've never seen Game of Thrones, stop whatever show you're watching, I don't care what it is, and watch Game of Thrones. If you've never read A Song of Ice and Fire, stop whatever you're reading and pick up A Song of Ice and Fire. The world is as immersive as you're going to find, especially in this fantasy genre. The characters are as deep as they are real. The magic system isn't so overwhelming that readers who aren't a fan of science fiction fantasy are going to hate it. And honestly, and maybe this is the biggest perk of the series, the history is, or at least it feels as real as true history. Like, that's how much thought and effort George R. R. Martin has put into this world. There are whole anthologies he's written with just the history of Westeros. Please stop doing them and give us the future stuff. We'll go back to that later. So if we're looking at just the first 5 seasons, which is what we have book-wise, basically, it's almost a tie for, which one's better. That alone makes the show worth it, like I said. That alone puts the show in rare air. I mean, some of the all-time popular adaptations can't even say that. Like, let's say, like Harry Potter. As great as the movies are, they're just not as good as the books. The show, at least for what we have book-wise to compare it to, is right there. I mean, it's neck and neck. I'd probably still say the books are better because of the quality of books 4 and 5 versus season 5. Season 5 is very good still, and it still has the same production level quality as the first 4 seasons, but some of the decisions to omit certain characters and storylines in favor of others didn't sit well with me. It's just slightly frustrating when we look back to the source material and see what could have been. So the edge goes to the books, but it's really not by much. Now, if you've only done one or the other to this point, if you have read the books but not seen the show, or vice versa, here's my advice. If you've read the books and don't want to watch the show because you're nervous about spoiling the ending for you, don't worry about it. It's not going to be the same. You might spoil some really big picture stuff, and even then I think that is an ill-fated assumption because of the backlash this receives. There's no way George R. R. Martin is going to replicate their mistakes. He is going to improve upon them. He's going to change things, and you don't have to worry about that. It's worth the journey alone, even with the bad ending, to experience what so many others have experienced, and because that really is what this is. It's a character-driven story, and it's not about the ending. It's about the journey that got us there. If you're a show watcher who's interested in the book series, like I assume most of the viewers of this will be, do it. Yes. Yes, definitely do it. Book 1 is pretty much the same story as season 1 of the TV series. So that's almost going to serve as a refresher, and you'll get an idea of George R. R. Martin's sense and style of writing. Books 2 through 3 are extremely similar to seasons 2 through 4. There are some minor differences that I actually think the show improves upon in some ways. And then obviously once you get to book 4, it's totally different. I mean, you can see that the inspiration for season 5 was pulled from there, but many of the storylines are completely different. And it's like a different experience. It's like basically seeing another person's rendition of a legend told from many years ago. It's really cool. I would highly recommend it. You'll be happy that you got to that point to experience something new in this immensely popular world. It's also like 5,000 pages long, the entire set that George R. R. Martin's given us. And by the time you finish, maybe we'll have gotten to Winds of Winter. I mean, who knows, right? We can dream. Probably not, but we can dream. Dreams are great. Keep dreaming. Thanks so much for joining me for the first spin-off episode in the Is It Better series. Later this week, I'm coming out with my second Movie Madness review for Zack Snyder's Justice League, a much sought after version of the 2017 Joss Whedon film. And next week, we're going to be getting back to some book reviews. We got a double feature coming up too, and I'll explain a little bit more about that next week. So thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good one, and get on this series if you haven't yet, because otherwise, what are you doing? What are you doing in the fantasy genre? Thanks.